Thank you so much. Wonderful to be here with everyone, and I know that some of the things that have been said may be a little strong. This is the last session of this retreat in which we've been looking at the subject of the power of yoga for inner healing. And in the last session we were looking at some of your questions which raised the issue of some of the dilemmas that we face that we don't have enough power to deal with effectively. So in all of the sessions I have, I think, demonstrated that no matter what problems arise, if we have adequate inner power, we are in a good position to handle them. So we would not be afraid about problems. Really, my conclusion is that the thing that we face is not really the problems. What we face is that we do not have adequate power, and we do not have the adequate practice of applying that power to resolve the problems. So in this last session, I want us to look at, one is just the process of accumulating the power and ways in which we apply the power and thus arrive gradually at a full integration of the soul or healing of the soul. I would just like to recapitulate that the healing that's needed is that the soul has got injured in the context of loss of power and absorbing negative energy from circumstances. How we use the power of yoga is twofold. One is to really create a very strong integrated resonance of spiritual energy that is held in the soul and is accessible to you for any work that's needed. Because there's always going to be more and more challenges and issues and so on that come up, and we have to have this power on a moment-by-moment basis to be able to respond to those challenges effectively and not take in any more wounds. And while we're doing that, which is on a daily basis, we will be honing our skills, virtues and powers to be able to do that better and better. So what that means is very often we will be handling a challenge or trying to handle a challenge, and we will sometimes be successful and sometimes we will fail. So whenever we fail, which will be fairly often, the position that we must take in regard to our failure is let go. As quickly as possible, let go, let go, let go. Because it's very important for us to be present for the next thing that's about to happen. And if we don't let go, we are dragged back into the previous event that was taking place, and then we are not fully present for the next one. And obviously, if we're not present, we will not handle it properly. You will experience that challenges will come very rapidly, sometimes 2 or 3 at the same time, so that along with having power to respond to it, you also need speed. I suppose some of you might like watching tennis on TV, the tennis matches, and when you watch sport, professionally or good amateurs, football, the players have to be technically very accurate, not go against the rules, and they have to be fast because the circumstances are changing every few seconds or even every second. And what we need is to have enough power to be able to apply agile shifting of our position very rapidly to respond to all these challenges that keep coming 10 or 15 at one time. Because if you don't, you get overwhelmed. We have to have power, let go, be fast, agile, and keep ahead of the game. That means we cannot afford to waste our time and energy getting distracted. One gets distracted easily, so you have to practice to be focused on what you have to be focused on and to disregard what's going on that you don't have to be focused on. So whenever situations like that arise, use it for your practice. And if it all goes wrong, have a good laugh and get with the next thing that happens. You really don't have time for regrets, feeling guilty, worrying about how you look, because another situation is coming and you need to be present. So that's one application of spiritual power in your present dealings. Then comes energies that live deep within yourself, in your subconscious, which get triggered by circumstances that correspond to some sort of trauma or hurt or damage that is there in your wound. So when a wound gets touched by a situation that resembles the situation that created your wound, it can raise an emotion or an overreaction or an inappropriate reaction which interferes with your way of handling what's going on. So you need to apply your spiritual power there also. So in getting good at applying your spiritual power to heal your spirit, it's very important to be able to recognize and quickly what sort of challenge is coming up, moment by moment. It may not happen really, really fast, like I'm saying very often, but sometimes it does. So something that's really helpful is to observe yourself and try to identify the patterns that you see, repeating patterns of how you feel, how you get triggered, what kind of behavior it creates, and note them. Because one attribute of the human spirit is that it has patterns, and some of these patterns are the wound. They're wound patterns, they are self-diminishing patterns, they are patterns of ego reaction, ego defensiveness, and there'll be something that you do in certain situations. We always do that, which is never the right thing. So you have to identify, put your finger on it. You may also find that certain situations regularly make you go into a confused state. And I think when you're practicing meditating and you're practicing operating on the inside and from the inside going out, it gives you a certain distance to be able to observe yourself better than when you're operating from the outside. It is said the camera never lies, and so you can take advantage of that. So a very interesting thing to do is to set up your camera on your mobile phone somewhere in a corner of your room, and just turn it on and let it run for some social interaction that's going on. Maybe you're with your family or with your friends or whatever. Just let it run like a CCTV, and for 2 or 3 hours or something. And then look at it, because very often there may be things about you that you miss, which you see when you see the camera. So you're in a social interaction, you're talking, you're doing stuff, and you experience yourself from inside, and you perceive what's going on around you from this angle. But your camera has got a different angle, and it's looking at the scene, and you're one of the players. So you'll see yourself as the camera sees you, or as someone else will see you, and you may be very surprised when you watch yourself how you perform. Sometimes a person may say to you something about your behavior, and they will say you are very timid and you don't feel it, or they say you're very arrogant, you don't see it, or they say, well, that's very angry, your behavior, and you think you're being very loving. So there'll be a discrepancy between how you sense yourself from inside and how other people sense you from the outside. But you don't see it, you don't feel it, and so you really don't know what they're talking about. You're perfectly willing to believe that they may be right, but because you can't perceive it, you don't feel it, you can't really act on it, because it's almost as if they're telling you something in some other language. But then have a look at the footage from your camera, and just watch yourself, and maybe you'll be able to see what they see, because the camera angle is like another person and your angle is from the inside. But when you're looking at yourself from this other angle, you see something that you don't see when you're seeing yourself, feeling yourself from the inside. It becomes really possible for you to put your finger on certain patterns, and also feel how you feel about yourself when you're seeing yourself from the outside doing something that up until now you just hadn't seen. So it's like a bit of a shock sometimes. So what this means is that you are actually out of touch with yourself. One kind of shock is you really get that you're disconnected from yourself, and the other is you see that you're doing something that you really didn't think you were doing. You can't deny it. When you're seeing it from the inside, you can deny it, but when you see it from the camera, you cannot deny it. So that puts you in a new situation. And what this will do is help you to be connected with yourself from disconnected, because you can no longer deny. Sometimes when something like this happens, that you all of a sudden see something that you couldn't see before, it will make you feel pain and maybe shame or embarrassment or some negative emotion, and you have to apply your spiritual power to manage this feeling, so that you let this feeling go through you, and that you don't stop it or resist it or push it down. So these ways of self-observation, and there are a few different ways, actually trigger the pain of your wound to get raised up from your subconscious, where you don't have access to it, to your conscious mind. And when it comes into your conscious mind, it brings with it very powerful feelings that move through you in a way that is really difficult to manage. So you need your power to let that sort of serpentine energy get through you without blocking it. When this energy is driving your behavior from the subconscious, then any circumstance that triggers the wound will come out as a character defect or some kind of negative behavior, and of course a negative karma. When you do this, you lose your power. So then all this power that you've been accumulating through your meditation and so on, it vanishes. And that vanishing of your power can also bring with it a feeling of hopelessness, or that you are unlikely to succeed in your work of your inner healing, or you feel you feel that you just will not make it, and it's kind of hopeless. This is why even in this situation it's very good to, as soon as things go badly, just let go, and stop the negative activity as soon as you notice it. You will find that you can stop this negative, like sliding down into your lowest point. You can stop it at any point as soon as you get back your sense of self, and then you don't have to go all the way to the bottom and then come all the way back again. So then you lose some power, but maybe you don't lose everything. And at that point, the most important thing to do is stop everything and find time to sit and meditate and replenish your power, because if you go all the way down and you don't keep replenishing it, it becomes very hard to get it back. So as you continue with this, observing yourself and writing, also writing is very important, because you really write down things that go wrong, what your challenges are, what you do, what you don't want to do anymore, very, very specifically, so that when it comes up again, you can easily recognize it, and quickly at the beginning of the process rather than way down the line. So when you're doing this quite attentively, it makes you much, much more self-aware than you would be if you were not really paying attention to this, so that your consciousness is actually quite heightened. So then what happens as the days go by is you will observe that circumstances are collaborating with you to give you opportunities to practice, to succeed in being the way that corresponds to your empowered self and not your disempowered self. Your sense of self becomes quite more acute, and you notice when you're in your soul consciousness, or when you drop to this body conscious or susceptible state. So you can say that the state of the soul being healed is the same as being in your power, staying in your power. If you drop, you can get yourself back up very quickly, and you are adroit and agile in resetting yourself so that you feel really that you are the real you, and the old you seems to fall away more and more. But what we also find is that in this process, it's very important to keep your level of spiritual strength up, because if we become negligent and we let it slide, then you kind of fall back into your old self and you lose contact with your empowered self, and then it becomes difficult to reconnect again. So we can conclude from this that a really big obstacle is to allow oneself to get distracted and forget to be attentive and vigilant on really being present and responding proactively to the challenges that come. It's quite good to be aware that one of the obstacles is that you kind of lose faith in yourself, or you don't really have sufficient regard for who you are, and that attitude towards the self will make you sabotage yourself. So observe yourself closely and see if you do anything or get into any attitude or mindset where you feel low about yourself, you don't care about yourself, or you think that you're not important, because it's like giving up. So even if you fail many times, even if other people have negative comments about you or try to discourage you or any of those things, you must promise yourself to not give up, to not abandon yourself, to be there for yourself. This is a very important ingredient in the healing of your spirit. In other words, you have to really set your priorities in a particular way. That the most important one in your life is you. The next most important one is God. And the third is everybody else. But the culture we live in mitigates against that. You will find some messages from the external moral authorities that tell you the most important is other people. And if they see you giving importance to yourself, they will say, don't be selfish. And they will discourage you from doing what you really need to do for yourself and which no one else can do for you. There'll be other cultures which will say, put God first and then other people. But in all cases, they will say, put yourself last. In some of the questions that came up in the other sessions, it was about abandonment. What do you do about the feeling of abandonment? I think the worst kind of abandonment is when you receive messages, indirect maybe, messages that tell you to abandon yourself. And so we have to really reset our thinking. We must get our thinking right, otherwise we will fail to do what we need to do to heal our spirit. So there is one aphorism that we hear very often in the practice of Raj Yoga and the studies, and I would like you to really note it down and think about it. So it's like a mantra, a piece of advice. Stay on your seat of self-respect. And this needs to be thought about so that you can really figure out, what does it mean when I'm staying seated on my seat of self-respect, and what does it mean to get off it, or to fall off it, or to not get onto it, so that you can always tell, am I in my self-honor? I call it also self-honor, or not. The opposite of being in your self-honor or self-respect is self-doubt. When you don't believe in yourself, when you don't value yourself, then you will sabotage your chances. In this situation, we have to realize that a lot of the wounds that we have carry with them messages that say, self, you are not important, you are not valuable, you are not worth it, and you have this kind of negative self-talk that is the wound kicking in and directing your own spirit. So one very important way in which to apply the power of yoga to your healing is to catch when you are falling or letting yourself get pulled down by these a negative sense of self, a loss of self value, and you feel that you don't have value, that you're not important, that you just want to give up, and then you go back into your soul pain, your soul injury, and then the wound dominates your spirit. That means that the wound is very alive and well in the subconscious and driving your behavior, and that is called the false ego. So you remember right at the beginning when I was talking about what is yoga, I mentioned that you can think of these two states of consciousness as switch on and switch off. So when you're in your power, in your self-respect, in your consciousness of yourself as the soul, you're switched on. But you just slip back imperceptibly, and we have to be so aware of this slipping back process so that we catch it and bring ourselves back up before it falls too far down. You can see that you really need power to stay up, and when it slips down, it's a sign that you still haven't got quite enough power to keep yourself up. So the way that you plan your day needs to have adequate time to sit and recover from the use of energy that you have used in some activity, and then fill yourself and then go into another activity. So this is very essential, otherwise you can't maintain your position. This means we want to go for an optimum way of living rather than a maximum or extreme way of living. So we need to use our power to feel what is optimum and to stay there. And yet there will be many, many pressures to make you do more than you should. And one of the problems that people have been talking about with the rules for handling the coronavirus pandemic is that when you work at home, there is a tendency to put in far more hours than when you work at your office. And so people who have noticed this have to be very, very strict about limiting the amount of time that they're sitting at their computer doing work, because otherwise it will invade, because your employer will try to get as much work as possible out of you. So in order for us to operate at an optimum level, we have to make sure that all the ingredients of self-empowerment and relaxation, quiet, focused activity, all of these things are in balance. And then you are in an empowered state or a healed state. And for all of this, you need a lot of spiritual power, which means you cannot afford leakages or loss of power, which happens when you get in a low mood, or you drop down your consciousness, or you get distracted. One thing that does interfere with your setting up of this balanced and optimum state is when a karmic account comes up for settlement. That may take the form of some sort of catastrophe, some accident, some very problematic relationship, some loss. All of these things are normal, but they interfere and we have to deal with them. So when we're thinking about our lives, you can see how important it is that I, the self, am really the most important person, and I must be careful not to let my energy or thought get distracted by thinking about what other people are doing, unless I need to. You really have to sort of edit your life so that unnecessary things are just cut out, because you need all your attention, all your time to really be in that balance and keep yourself free from being under pressure, because as soon as you put yourself under pressure, you go out of balance again and you lose the optimum. So really the highest priority is your accumulation and absorption and maintenance of your stage of consciousness, your absorption of spiritual energy, and really try to keep yourself on that higher level and make this a number one priority. And you'll find that when you do this, then when there is something else that comes along as a temptation or an opportunity that you actually don't need or something like this, it's just a kind of almost like a conspiracy to prevent you from keeping your level up, and you have to notice it. And when something comes along, do I need to do this? If not, stay with your stage of consciousness and let those things fall away. And then you will get closer and closer and closer to a state of being balanced, optimum, in your power, and really healed. And it's a continuing process. So I will stop now, and let us just have a few minutes together to just consolidate this stage of optimum, in your power, balance, so that you just feel what that is from the inside, and then you remember that this is how I must keep myself. So let yourself turn within and be conscious. Be really conscious of what it's like to be a pure, peaceful being of light. Let yourself feel what it's like to be in your power. Open yourself to that energy from beyond. and feel the flow passing through you. Feel this flow of energy filling you to completion and spilling over. Feel yourself absorbing it into every cell of your body, every corner of your soul. Feel the radiance of light emanating from your being. And just hold that stage of absorption and radiance. Let yourself feel value and appreciation for that beautiful source of light. This is your reliable and undiminishing source of energy. Maintain your connection with this source and don't let yourself fall away from it. Hold still in the silence. Om.